Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you enjoyed lunch and had some networking. Before we get started and before Linda comes back, we just wanted to give an update on the interviews tomorrow. And I think we have 3 or 4 laptops in the background that aren't muted, so it's kind of freaking us out. There's a little bit of an echo. So we got messages constantly through the weekend, yesterday, even this morning, about different requests on how to tweak different interviews and change the schedule. And there's a huge ripple effect anytime we make one change. And we just got an email this morning that there is 3 students, and I think they had 10 interviews each, or a high number of interviews, and 3 of them canceled for various reasons. So we will have to look at the schedule again, and we may send a new one out tonight. Just with 3 students dropping out, it resulted in 30 empty interview spots. So we've got to try to populate that and get it out to everyone tonight. So if you end up, well, maybe we'll send out the names of the people that can't make it. And if you're an employer and you see that name, you could probably put out a chat that you've got an open spot. If a student is interested, they should come and talk to you directly, or send a direct message to you. But we'll also try to, maybe Hannah will be up till 2 a.m. again, and we'll try to get a new schedule out for everyone tomorrow morning. But yeah, the impact of anyone canceling or trying to change things in the grid is really challenging. Anyhow, back to the session. This morning, we didn't have the gift for Francis, but if he's on the call, this was a beaded medallion. One side is the Blood Tribe logo, and on the other side is our Community Futures logo. So Francis, we'll get that out to you when it's safe. We definitely don't want to see anyone catch COVID or cause anything harmful to happen. And then also we had a medallion for Sam as well, more than just the socks and hat. He was super happy about them. But Sam, here was your medallion.
Oh wow, thank you very much. This is great. That is gorgeous. That is beautiful. Thank you so much. I'm a hardcore Packers fan. Their stadium, Lambeau Field, where they play, is on the Oneida Indian Reservation. It's on Indian land. I guess all NFL stadiums are in Indian land, but this one especially. So this is close to my heart. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Sam.
Thank you so much.
And when we were beating that, when we had that ordered, we were really hoping the Packers would win, and we would have presented, it would have been a championship medallion.
Oh my gosh, I would have cried on camera.
Next year,
we'll
get them. Okay, Loa's coming back. Thanks.
Thank you. And then we do have some gifts as well for the student panel. So they're beautiful. So I'll just take a second to show you. The student panel gifts all are comprised of several things in them. So we have all different color blankets and different gifts and feather. So they're really cool. So maybe we'll take a photo of them and put them on Facebook as well. So thank you so much to the team for all of the great things that they're doing and trying to create this experience exactly like the experience that we had when we were in person. So at this time, I want to go through a bio of Linda Manyguns. And Linda Manyguns is somebody that I've known, oh gosh, since I was probably 10 years old. She did a lot of work with my grandparents, Joe and Josephine Crochu from the Piikani Nation. And so Linda Manyguns is a Blackfoot woman born on the Tsuut'ina Nation, now registered in Siksika. She is the grandmother to 5 children. She grew up in Europe as an Air Force brat. In her adult life, she sought out and now embraces the Blackfoot culture as her core identity. In the early years, she worked as a high steel construction worker, as a red steel chef, a union leader for the CUP, one of the largest union organizations that are out there, ran in the NDP elections for Red Deer South, and owned 2 restaurants in Utah. She earned 4 degrees, a BA in psychology, an MA in sociology, LLB, University of Ottawa, and a PhD in philosophy from Trent University. She was awarded a second-year sociology award for undergraduate degree. In law school, a fellow student nominated her for the Karim Greenspan Award for Outstanding Achievement. Her national projects include getting recognition for the eagle feather to swear oaths in the courts of Canada. She also worked in the Indian Land Claims Commission in Ottawa. She has been a professor teaching Indigenous law, Indigenous health and community development for 10 years, and she supervises PhD students to help MA students in a variety of unique research studies. So at this time, I would like to welcome Linda Miniguns.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you. Woo! Oh, it's a pleasure to be here. Feels like coming home whenever I'm here, and whenever I get an opportunity to actually share just a little bit of what I know. The presentation that I have put together today is a result of some inquiries that were made by Rob and his team, and we asked the employers what they were interested in hearing. I have done presentations over the last few years, and they suggested everything but the kitchen sink this time round. So I did my very best to try to put it all together, to try to answer all of the requests that were put forward. And I hope that you enjoy it. Lizzie? Okay, due to the volume of information that was requested, the best I can offer you is just a tiny sliver of the Indigenous history of Aboriginal peoples in the Americas. And this is a very, very broad-based presentation, mainly because of the inquiries, but I think it's because there is a real interest that I'm seeing and that I think most Canadians can feel in understanding who we are, understanding what the difference is, and understanding even more why we still want to be Indians. Okay. So the foundational pieces, oops, I'm just trying to learn this little piece of equipment here. It's a little slower. Oh, there we go. It's slow. So I have to have patience. Okay, so basically what we're going to cover is pre-contact, contact, and the post-reservation period. For the pre-contact piece, what I wanted to do is I wanted to give you just a small sense of what the world was like here in North America prior to contact. Then what I want to do is I want to move to contact. And what you see there in that list is some of the primary pieces of legislation, or like the colonialism, resource depletion, etc., or the legislation that's impacted us and still impacts us today. Then we go to the post-reserve period. And in that particular period of time, that is when we were already put onto the reserves and what happened after that period of time. So you can see there's chunks of time there, 1950, 1969, 1970, 73, etc., and then the land claims. So in general, that's what we were going to be covering. And then more importantly, we're going to take a look as well at how all of these pieces actually impact the Aboriginal people today, and how it shaped who we are, and how it actually brings our world together in a very different way than the general Canadian population. So if we take a look at what the populations were prior to contact, 1492, they estimate that there was 90 to 112 million Aboriginal people who were living in the North Americas. Right now, our populations are barely making 1 million. Okay, so you multiply that by 90 times. Just on the Caribbean islands alone, there were an estimate of 25 million people living. Those people were enslaved. They were the first slaves that were worked to death, actually building the sugarcane fields and putting together what would now be the places where the slaves that were brought from Africa to work. Okay. Today, the First Nations population is the most quickly growing in all of the North America. Registered and treaty Indians have grown by 39.3% since the last stats were done. Métis populations as well increased by 51.2%, which is a staggeringly huge increase. Now, a good portion of why the Métis populations are increasing is because the reserves are limiting the number of people that can come onto the bands, and the Indian Act right now is removing status from Aboriginal people faster than at any time in history. So let's take a look at what time immemorial was like. Let's take a look at the world as it was prior to contact. And we know that it was natural. We know we lived with the environment. But when we look at that, we have to actually look at some of the realities that were there. Okay? The truth of the matter is we had cities here. What are true cities? True cities that were in North America were larger than any of the cities that were in Europe. Larger than Rome, larger than London. They were more complex, right? We had food sources that we had exploited and that we had developed and cultivated that were wide-ranging and quite expansive. We had expansive, geez, I can't even read those things, but we had, is there any possibility that you can bring that up in size there? That's better. Sorry about that. We had knowledge and health and the workings of the body of the peoples. We knew we had blood systems. We knew how our brains worked. We knew how the skin worked. As a matter of fact, we healed a lot of people by putting medicines on skins of people when they came over from Europe that were suffering from scurvy. As well, we had trade routes that went from all the way up from Alaska, all the way down the coasts, all the way down into South America. And our trade with the people north and south covered and included all of the foods that we got. We had social structures that were highly developed, including policing. Our structures were so complex that the United States is enjoying the privilege of operating one for its governance system. We also had the equivalent and commitments to our ways of life that were the embodiment of constitutions. We had family structures that were held together by very, very strict rules and complex experiential learning systems. Our people were true researchers. They studied the world around them, and they knew the helpful parts of it, and they knew the dangerous parts of the world around them. Another really important piece to be aware of is that in our travels, it wasn't just in the North Americas that we traveled. Our foods went from South America over to Africa and to India and China. We were going back and forth across the oceans. As a matter of fact, we were actually over in Ireland 16 years before Christopher Columbus came over to North America. He met us in Ireland. So we had already gone across the oceans to their territories. Some of the civilizations that existed that were extremely complex were like the Aztecs. You can see this range here, these leveling and layerings of this mountainside. Those were used in order to train plants to grow at all different altitudes. The Aztec people were a pyramid building people, and they had long wars and they built a lot of monuments. Mayans built observatories to watch the skies. They knew all the planets and were completely aware of them. There's all sorts of philosophical poems that they had. And they had books, these people. They also had libraries. I have had the opportunity of finding some of these library books that were burnt. Incas lived practically, and you can see the leveling for the cultivating of all the plants. Corn was their specialty, and corn can grow at almost every altitude in North America as a result of that, and is probably one of the most substantive agricultural products that exists. As a matter of fact, the majority of the food that is eaten today by humans all around the world was cultivated by Aboriginal people here in North America. The other contribution to the world that Indigenous people provided was cotton. One of the mistakes that Christopher Columbus made was when he was looking for spices and looking for the East, he also knew that they had beautiful silk cloths that he had seen when he was in Europe. Well, when he arrived in the Caribbean islands, the cottons that Aboriginal people wove were so fine and beautiful that he mistook those cottons for silks. And that's why he thought he was in India and we got called Indians. Our fibers were superior to anything that existed in Europe. The best that the Europeans could develop was just a very tiny fiber. That tiny fiber was extremely difficult to work with. And as a result of that, it was super expensive. Well, once they got to North America and they found the strands that we had developed and cultivated, it would actually transform the world. For the first time, they had a product that was so expansive that they had excess so that they could start to sell it and so they could start to make a profit. Prior to that, the weavers that were in the old world could keep up to the amount of wool and fiber that was there. So there was never any excess. So it was the indigenous cottons that created the first excess in productivity and therefore created and expanded globalization. We also developed all of the colors for cloth and material. We had huge farms that cultivated certain bugs that when it took over 4,000 of these little tiny beetles that would be processed in order to create the color of purple. Purple was a highly prized color, and the indigenous people here in North America were the ones that knew how to extract that color, and it became highly prized and important in the world. I wanted to show you a picture of Hochelaga. That's Montreal now. This was wood carving that was done after the first contact. And I want you to look at it very closely, because what it does is it kind of blows away this myth of Aboriginal people just hunkering down in sheds or wandering around picking and foraging for berries. If you look in the background, you'll see huge crops. If you notice the surrounding edifice around the village, you'll see planks of wood. So the indigenous people were capable of creating planks of wood and building strong barriers around their cities and towns. And that's what the European people found when they first got here, up in the northern part of the Americas. These are very important etchings because they show you that the myths that have been perpetuated, that Aboriginal people were heathens and were uncivilized, are just not true. Another city that was up in the northern area was located just south of the Great Lakes. This was right on the Mississippi River, and this city here was actually named by the French people for the indigenous people that were there. That's the best that they could make the word out, as Chicoya. And this location was traded for almost 100 years before the city was abandoned. I'm fairly certain that it was abandoned due to diseases that came through. And there were over 6,000 people on average in the marketplaces, and they had people from all over North America that would come and trade in order to expand and share information. Now you might wonder how on earth all of those people could be trading, and the communication method that was used was signing, using your hand sign languages, which was an important universal way to communicate. Okay, so we know that there were cities, there was all kinds of agriculture, there was cottons, there was fabrics, there was weaving, there was plank making, there was even toys that were found that had wheels on them. We know for a fact that the number 0 was also discovered. So we know that there was intellect, a great deal of intellect in this world of the Americas prior to contact. So now we have contact, okay? Our perspective on contact was probably quite eager. We had huge populations, obviously, because we were there to greet every single boat. We never missed one. But when we met the people, I mean, the objective would have been the same as the European objective, and that was to trade, to find out what they have that's of interest, to see what is neat to enjoy and learn about. I have a series of maps, and I've only pulled a few of these, but what I want these maps to show you is how quickly our world was transforming in North America due to contact, okay? The yellow that you see is the Spanish appropriation of the lands, all right? And on the left-hand side, that's a map from 1643, and the yellow goes up to about halfway up through to the United States, and you just see small bits and pieces around the Hudson's Bay of the British and along the eastern seaboard, where the British territories are starting to develop and whatnot. Then what you do is you look at 1713, and you'll also notice that striped out centerpiece there. That's a really important piece, because as the Europeans are moving into the territory and they're fighting constantly with each other, there's huge battles that Aboriginal people are involved in on one side or the other, and they suffer quite badly if one side loses. Then they're penalized usually by the winning party and whatnot. So you've got 1713, And you see the British are all the way down to Florida. You can see that the Spanish are losing territory. And you also see that there's the French area and the Hudson's Bay region has expanded somewhat. Okay. All of this impacted us quite significantly because as the people were coming into the territory, they were hunting out all of the animals, all of the fish. The Great Lakes were emptied of all fish by the middle of the 1800s, which meant that the indigenous people were starving throughout all of these territories, and they would become more dependent and reliant as a result of contact. It was very important as we move through this. Go to the next set of maps. And we see in 1774, we've got quite a bit of change here. What you're seeing now is you've got the Russians actually coming into the on the Alaska Panhandle and coming down. And so you've got a new intrusion, a new intruder that's now taking over some of the territory. You've got Canada, right, which has now established itself. You've got some of the territories that are moving into, and then when we get into 1870 or 1825, sorry, I'm having trouble reading these maps. You actually have the whole of Alaska now taken over by Russia and coming down the Panhandle. You also have the Louisiana Purchase that the United States bought. The United States is now forming. And you can see all that white territory that has no owner yet. That's around the Vancouver area. Again, you see the striped out area. That striped out area would stay like that right up until the Blackfoot people signed treaty. It's the only place in North America that continued as Indigenous territories. All of these wars and this changes in the map also included major battles and wars that Aboriginal people had to partake in, as well the extraction of all of the furs and animals that were going on. Most of the people in the north were suffering from broken cultures and their standard civilizations by this time. Okay, all of this was taking place on top of Aboriginal people long before treaties would even start to be written. Okay. The other pieces that are very important about contact was the loss of the buffalo. Okay. We know that the Hudson's Bay retained its monopoly throughout the whole Hudson's Bay watershed area until the purchase of Rupert's Land by Canada. Well, there was a very nebulous period before Canada purchased it, and that was, it was open for sale to all the world, and Russia was looking at it too, and so was the United States. Canada purchased it, but it meant that they had to make significant movement in order to get a train across and to get populations out to the west of their own in order to maintain what we know of as Canada today. So there was a tremendous amount of political pressure all around, and the Indigenous people were at up until 1812 an important part of Canada's development. But once 1812 happened, they quickly became of no use or consequence, but more of a burden. Okay. Colonization and colonialism are the mandates that actually formed the Indian Act. But the most important piece of legislation that we have is the Royal Proclamation of 1763. And that proclamation is woven into the Indian Act today because it was the signed document that the government of the British government, the government of England, and then when they transferred the responsibility of Indians with the British North America Act over, it was written into the Indian Act. So there has to be, so all the rules for actually taking our territories are written into the Indian Act. And more recently, they're now written into the Constitution of Canada Act, actually, as of 1982, Section 35. Colonization was probably the most severe tool that the government used in order to suppress us. Suppression was absolutely extreme. Aboriginal people were reduced to nothing but children, could not sign a sheet of paper, could not own a piece of land, could not work, could not hire a lawyer, could not act as a functioning human being until 1963. So the reserves were put in place. Now we know how the reserves were kind of set in place, where there are historical treaties. But how on earth did they get the people on the reserves that were in all of the non-treated areas? All of Ontario, all the Maritimes, all of BC, all of the North. It was through food. Because as the populations moved into those places, they shot and killed all the animals. And so the Aboriginal people were starving. And so they would use food. They would tell the Indigenous people that an Indian agent would be at a certain spot, and anybody that came and got food, they would sign their names on. And that's how they got their names listed on the treaties in those areas. For the historical treaties, there were 11 of them written, starting with Robinson Hero. They started with the Great Lakes just in front of the train in order to get it across. There was massive development there. People were being sent, and the people that were being sent across Canada that were, being pushed into the West, their lives were fairly pitiful too. But one of the most important things for us was that as these populations surrounded us, they brought disease. And our numbers were reduced and reduced and reduced every year. Imagine, the first diseases that came into the Western Canada area were 100 years before we actually saw white people. First diseases were the early part of the 1700s. We never saw white people till the mid 1800s. So we had 100 years of losses, and then even more once the population started to move in, not for trade, but for actually settlement. Our numbers were continuing to reduce, and there was a period of time when the government quit writing treaties. Around 1929, the last treaty adhesion was written. And at that point in time, both the government, all of the politicians, and all of the academic people believed that the Aboriginal people were going to die out. My grandma's reserve was down to 65 people on Tsuut'ina. The Blackfoot people, all three Blackfoot nations, were down to 700 people. When we signed, we were close to 7,000. They truly thought that we would die out and we wouldn't survive. This is smallpox. We were put in small houses on the reserves. Some of those still remain today. This is my uncle here. This is my uncle Bull Bear. He wore a top knot. These great warriors, great warriors were forced to stand in line for a pound of meat. Not even enough to sustain them. while the rest of their families were covered with smallpox and the diseases, and there were no vaccinations like we have today. It was devastating. They were not allowed off the reserve. They were forced to stay on. And so this period of not just isolation, but dependency was forced on Indigenous people. From the time of the Indian Act being drafted and people being put on the reserves, they had to go ask the Indian agents for food, had to ask if they could go anywhere. If they found work, the Indian agent would get the money and sign for it. The issue of dependency became a part of the way of life. It still is there. We still have a dependency issue because of this long period of time when independence was taken away. So changes started to happen in 1963. We got to vote and we were considered Canadians. It's been a long haul since then. As soon as that declaration and that statement was made into law, the Canadian people probably were not even aware of that, but the Indigenous people were aware everywhere. And in every part of Canada, cases started to emerge for Indigenous rights. Aboriginal people, well, we had signed off on selling a piece of land, had never given up any of their rights as Aboriginal people. They had never given up their governments. They had never given up their right to hunt fish. They had never written or given away any of these elements of their original way of life. As a matter of fact, in our treaties, we often said, and we'll continue to be able to live our way of life. And we were told that we would. So after 1963, the cases started to go, and we would probably, and we probably will continue to spend billions of dollars establishing our rights. Indigenous rights are now clearly established. If there is no mention in a treaty that we gave up our government, that we gave up our health care or anything like that, then they still exist. With the Constitution of Canada, the word existing rights, the word existing is now being transformed into this gigantic piece and body of law that establishes that everything that we did before, we can do today, and we can do it today in a modern world. Okay? But these are just rights, and the importance for us as people that live day to day is knowing that as these rights are regained and awareness of them becomes known, what's also happening side by side is a revival of our cultures. Our cultures are becoming stronger again. We are starting to have ceremonies that are growing, powwows are growing, are becoming aware of our genealogies, our histories, our societies, where we were, what we did, knowledge of the way that we lived with the land. All of that stuff is all being revived as well. Because one of the things that the government did to us, which was supposed to assimilate us, but ended up backfiring on them, was that they put Aboriginal people into isolated places, way far in the bush. And as a result of that, what did the Aboriginal people do? They sat and they taught their grandchildren where their original territories were, what all the old stories were. And those old stories and all of that information, that oral knowledge, is what is winning in all those court cases today. So we've come a long ways. And our oral knowledge is probably our most powerful knowledge that exists today. And in that oral knowledge are also the lessons about the way to live right. We survived. It's amazing. It's astounding that we survived. Right? And one of the most important things as we go through this period of survival is recognizing that when we talk about Aboriginal people, we always keep in mind that Aboriginal people are not all the same. You can't just generalize and make a blanket statement about Aboriginal people. Every single culture is unique. The people that are all around the Great Lakes were matrilineal. Everything was transferred down through the women's side. Here in Blackfoot territory, I would say that there was neither patrilineal or matrilineal. I believe that we permitted all people to be independent. Women could be chiefs, men could be moto geeks. There was no limitation on individuality. Cultural characteristics also have ethics involved in them. And there's rules of behavior. Those are all coming forward again. And so as our cultures strengthen and our elders are now being put back in the place of respect that they had before, they're reteaching us about the way to be kind, about the way to respect, the fact that you don't step in front of them, the fact that you honor the knowledge holders in whatever form they might be, whether it's of plants or animals or horses or children or whatever it is that there is their unique specialty, that we honor those and that we start to allow these placements to reshape and reform in the world. Now I've put up this slide and it's talking about the cultural imperatives by Dr. C. Grant. He was the first psychologist ever that went through the educational system. And he wanted to go and help his people. And when he went up north in Ontario to go and work amongst his people, once he had gotten his training in the university, he found it didn't work for his people. Before he went up there, I believe he was told that there was something like about 379 people that were diagnosed as being schizophrenic. Well, he went up there and found that his training just didn't fit when he tried to apply it to Indigenous people. Well, the fact of the matter is, whether it's psychology, sociology, policing, healthcare, every single piece that's a person is trained for in the universities is done based on a model of there's 10 key factors of a normal Eurocentric thinking person, right? And everything is shaped around that. Well, what he found is that those 10 imperatives are not Indigenous. They don't fit us. They don't fit who we are and what our value systems are. So what he did was he developed an Indigenous set of cultural imperatives. And you've heard of them before. They're things like sharing, right? Of course, we've heard about Indian time and whatnot in a joking and somewhat not joking way. But all of these things are actually are based in the way that we think as Indigenous people and how we evaluate things. So I won't have time to be able to go through the entire process, but I want to at least share with you 4 of the main ones that are most obvious. okay? The reason it's very important to understand these is if you're an employer and you have an Indigenous person that's come into your environment, or if you're another employee, or even if you're a neighbor or a storekeeper or anybody in the general population, you're expecting to be able to read and understand the people in your environment based on the university 10 European cultural imperatives. Aboriginal people don't fit in those. You've also heard about the one where you don't stare somebody in the eye. That is very true. That's probably one of the rudest things that you can do to an elder, is to stare them down like that. At the same time, if you go to court, the judge expects you to look them in the eyes. So do employers, and so do other people within the non-Indigenous society. They expect you to behave in particular ways. Well, as our cultures start to survive and start to grow again, these imperatives will be starting to grow again. And so we're at a point in society where we absolutely have to start to understand one another and start to read these as miscues rather than just labeling the person as a bad person, okay? These miscues have ended up with diagnoses for Aboriginal people as passive-aggressive, as being in opposition of everything, of demonstrating depression, maybe because they won't look at you, because they sit and think, because, you know, and as a result of that, it's creating total misunderstandings of the real intent of Indigenous people and in real intent of other people that you're working with in the workplace. Neighbors, teachers, employees, all of these. So what Brant did was he put his cultural imperatives into 3 categories. The most important one, I believe, is the conflict suppression. And then there's the projection of conflict, and then there's the humiliating superego. And those get quite complex in looking at. But we'll look at the conflict suppression. Now, one of the ways that actually emerges is Aboriginal people will not like to show up another person and embarrass other people. You don't like to be embarrassing others. And so our culture has learned ways to respect all people. And the word respect comes up a lot, but it's not just a word, it's an action. It's actual ways in which we do things. So let's look at conflict suppression behaviorism. If we look at the ethic of non-interference, okay, this particular behaviorism discourages any kind of physical, verbal, or psychological pressure or tensions, right? This results in being read, especially by social workers and people that are authoritarian minded, as being permissive, okay? Our people believe that children learn through experience. When they made a mistake, they would find out through the pain or through whatever it is that they suffered, that they should actually, not do that again. And I had an experience myself, and that was when I was doing a research project, and that was with Annie Bershinbaum. And she told me this story when I asked her how women should be raising their children. Of course, she told me a story. That's what they do. They tell us stories. The reason they tell us stories is that ethic of non-interference. They don't want to tell you what to do. They'll tell you a story and you must extract the learning out of it. So her story was about her grandson. Her grandson had driven her to go and get some groceries. And when she went to go get the groceries, she was inside the grocery store, and her grandson's buddies came up to the car and said, "Oh, come on, we're in parts and we can just go across the border there and we can go get some beer and your grandma won't even know, we'll be back." And so they talked him into it. Well, he was gone for several days. And when she was at home, she found out that there was a terrible accident that happened. And so she got the principal and the chief, and they all went down there to go get him. And what they found out was the car rolled over and his friends were all killed and he lived. And so she wanted him brought home. And this principle, this ethic of non-interference was animating her. She wasn't mad about the car. She wasn't mad about the fact that he had gone and listened. She realized that he was right now in a learning thing. And so the only thing that she asked him was, what was it that you were trying to get when you went with those guys, so I can help you get that in a way that's not going to be so harmful. Okay? So we try, by not interfering in the mistakes an individual makes, but rather we try to help people get to the important things that motivate them without making them suffer more. So our rules and our ways of teaching are totally different. The rule of non-competitiveness, okay? We don't live in a hierarchical world. We talk about circles, we have talking circles, we have different elements in our cultures where there's equality. We promote equality, we promote, uniformity, and we like to reduce rivalry. And the reason for that, and that sharing actually comes in, and I'll talk about it later, is if you have one person in camp and they've got a whole great big teepee full of all the dried meat in the world, and the other people are starving, there's going to be a lot of issues, right? So we avoid that by not placing a great amount of credence on a person that hoards. Matter of fact, one of the worst things that you can even get called today is stingy. If you're a stingy person, boy, I'll tell you, that's like a bad swear word to have. So don't be stingy. Share is the most important thing. Emotional restraint was also, this is conflict suppression behaviorism, okay? One of the most important rules that we had in our culture was that if you have somebody that's mad at this and mad at that and doing this and, just acting out constantly, well, they have buttons all over the place that anybody can push. And if you've got buttons hanging out all over the place that anybody can push, that's a weakness. And so you were expected to be able to control and repress your hostility no matter what anybody does to you. We even had a society that where an Aboriginal person felt that they were, done wrong, they could go into the society and their jobs would be to harass other people to see if they would not be able to maintain their emotions. So our job, one of the most significant parts of our world and keeping it together and having it function well, was to have very good control over your emotions. Well, that is a real problem in today's world, because while we've been trained that way and while we've been taught that way, if a person is involved with drinking or alcohol, it tends to explode. People tend to explode, and it's got quite a reverse negative impact on our individuals who are trying to balance things and stuff like that. Sharing, of course, this is an institutionalized expectation in all of our Blackfoot societies and in our culture. And I would say that this element is part of a good deal of most Indigenous cultures. And that is, if a person is too powerful, then there's a lack of equality. And so we actually don't promote that type of development. It's not considered a good thing. Now, the reason these are really important is because as our cultures start to emerge again, these rules are starting to be taught and retaught to our young. It makes it very different than when a person goes to work or goes into an education facility. The things that they're trying to get from these environments is very different. When I was teaching, I can tell you right now, every single Aboriginal student that I taught, when I asked them what they were going to do, they were going to go home and whether they were going to be a doctor or a lawyer, whether they were going to be a business person, whatever it might be, whatever the field of study, they were going to go home and help. I didn't hear that kind of results coming from non-Aboriginal students. Okay? So that need to give back, that sharing, is absolutely built right into almost a DNA. Well, that sharing is very different. And you know, I've actually sat on committees where students have lost jobs. Why did they lose jobs? Because the employer couldn't get hold of them on the phone. Well, when I found out about why they couldn't get hold of them on the phone, it was because Uncle somebody had passed away, and the choice was between paying for the phone or helping to put the money into the burial money. And so the people will all be expected to help and to share with the family responsibilities. That sharing piece is becoming even stronger. So employers need to know that you're not just hiring an employee, but along with that employee comes some contingent responsibilities within the family. So you need to have your ears open, or be sure to allow that person to be able to come and tell you about those things, so that you're not just considering this person negligent for not being available. Issue of non-competitiveness, employee of the month or employee of the week. Our Aboriginal people don't necessarily, majority of them don't want to be put up front like that. Our people are shy. Our people are quiet. They like to do their work. They like to just be in good and safe places. But getting up like that is not necessarily something that's going to be a driving force. So when a person doesn't act like they're wanting to be competitive, isn't necessarily that the person has got a lack of interest, but rather it doesn't fit the criteria of success for an Indigenous person. As well, emotional restraint. One of the things that a person will be judged for, like if any of you watch cops and robbers shows, when they're interviewing a potential suspect and the police are in there and they're watching their emotions. Well, they're watching using that 10 shaped block of European people. So when they say, have you been accused, or, you know, they're accusing him of murder or of doing something, the automatic reaction is to argue quickly that, no, I didn't do it, no, Aboriginal people won't behave like that. As a result of that, they often end up going to jail or being assumed to have been guilty, okay? So in an employer situation, the same thing will happen. The employees expect that the employer should know what's going on. They don't want to be telling the employer. So these types of understandings are critical for our success, and we have to build these bridges between our culture and the Eurocentric culture in order to move forward. Okay. So these are just some of the issues, cultural imperatives in Canadian society. For sure, these characteristics of Indigenous people will be in conflict with the rules of dominant society. Indian time, Métis time, okay, what that really means for Aboriginal people, they're no different than if you take a European man that wants to invest some money. He won't do it until all the things have lined up for him. Well, our Aboriginal world is exactly the same way. We need to have all the pieces together before we'll make a decision. That's true Indian time. The being late all the time, or not being aware of things, is very different. Indian time means that certain actions are done when the berries are ripe, when the ice is off the pond, first thunder. Those things are coming back. Those are the indicators for us, for certain societies, and for certain ceremonies to take place. If you have an Indigenous employee that's involved in some of the, deeply involved in their culture, they may be impacted by some of these elements, and you would do a lot of benefit to at least have a conversation around that. Okay. Shaking hands is another issue. As employers, I mean, I know for a fact with business, they actually have courses on how to shake a hand to show how determined and how sincere and how positive you are. And I remember John Critchan's wife shook my hand on a stage. I thought I was going to die. She was squeezing my hand so hard. Well, our people don't do that. We barely touch each other's hand, and it's to show gentleness, and it's to show friendship. So even something as innocuous as a handshake can be misread. Our people aren't wimpy just because they're trying to be gentle, and that could easily be misread that way. Other rules of behavior, right? The most important part is not to embarrass an individual, okay? Not to demean an individual, not to create a hierarchical environment. Aboriginal people work very hard not to do that and to treat all people equally. So putting a person on a pedestal is not a way that makes a person feel comfortable. I remember there was a bunch of students, I was reading it in a residential school, and the teacher told them to read this book or something for the next day. And they got into the class the next day, and she looks at one boy and says, okay, tell me what it says. And he's shy and he doesn't say anything. Then she asks all the rest of the students, and they are all the same. Well, the other ones, and possibly even that boy, had read it, but to point them out and center them out embarrassed him, and so they wouldn't behave like they were expected to. The most important thing, we're teaching our children how to move like the elders, and that is to respect one another, to not interfere in a person's learning process, and to avoid conflict, right? The way that we do that, if you ask an elder for help, they will never, let's say you're having some problems in employment or even at home, and you go to that elder, they're not going to say, oh, well, this one is wrong and that one is wrong. They will never, ever do that. Instead, what they'll do is they'll tell you a story that has the teaching in it, and you have to apply the teaching in your life. Okay? Anger is not a part of our way of life, and that's the suppression of emotions, right? And if you're going to get angry all the time, then you would be considered very dangerous to have around in the community, because you'd constantly be set off. So those are factors that will be emerging in our... Okay. So the conflicts in this is that European people are adversarial. Our justice system is adversarial. You develop two theories of a case, and they argue it. There's accusation, there's confrontation, there's guilt, there's argument, there's criticism, and retribution, right? These are all factors that don't fit into an Indigenous way of life. Those are considered antagonistic to harmony and peace and coexistence. Also, the whole idea of guilt and innocent, it's based on theories rather than on facts. Our talking circles and our way is to bring all the facts in. And so if somebody is late for work, then perhaps you need to find out, maybe somebody is shutting off or taking the alarm clock, or maybe there's no gas in the car, or like look at the whole picture, right? We also know that we need to, for us, in our way of amending things is through restitution, right? So we have very different ways of actually promoting this. All of this information is available to you as well, these PowerPoints, so that you can look at it. In concluding, I would like to say, I am very, very pleased that we are now at this point in history, because for the first time, we're all sitting down and we're listening to one another. And for the first time, we're actually asking questions, and I think that we're sharing with one another on a level that is beyond anything that's gone before us. And there are elders, and there's resources, and there's information that we can actually bring forward that will bring that unity. And I think it's about building third space. Okay. Thank you. I believe that we're going to go to question and answer now. Okay.
So there's Jocelyn, Ramillard.
Okay, so
it's right here. So
Okay, so do you want me to read it?
ask Colin if he wants to be on the camera. If you want him to be brought on stage,
Okay, so
Colin.
Colin, do you want to be brought on stage?
Can you hear me okay?
Yes, now I can.
Thank you. Thank you, Linda. Very appreciative for your sharing of this information, very informative. One of the things that I would like to ask you, if I can, is about the Indian Act itself. I know it's a very hot topic in a lot of cases, and you've done a good job of kind of highlighting it here. I know that many indigenous, non-indigenous people don't have a full understanding of the importance of the act itself, and many simply just want to like have it go away and eliminate it. Could you please, I guess, could you just talk a little bit about why it is such an important piece to keep in place, and in particular of interest is about what you might think the modern replacements or um, or work towards modernizing it, so that there's a partnership base versus what is currently in place.
Okay, so the Indian Act was written for Indian agents to start with, okay? It was their job description. And basically, what it did was it created chief and council. That's not traditional. That was put in place in all 640 reserves across Canada. They imposed that so that they would only have to talk to one person, right? It was for the government's convenience, okay? The actual mechanism itself is really quite paltry. It only designates, like the Royal Proclamation says, that land is kept for the exclusive use and occupation of Indigenous people. So that's what the reserves are, right? And so the Indian Act enforces that only Indians are allowed to live on those reserves that are status Indians, that are registered, and now the Band Council can say, you know, who else can live on there. As far as powers of chief and council, they can't change the Indian Act. They have no authority whatsoever to change it. The rights of Indigenous people on the reserves, they can't even gather up a bag of gravel and sell it without the minister's approval. You can't even write a will without the minister interfering. You can't get divorced without the minister interfering, okay? So the control over Indigenous people on those territories, they have no title to the land. They just are allowed to live on it, okay? There's no rights whatsoever adhered to or provided to Indigenous people on those places and on those spaces of land. They're just designated reserved. The word reserve is very important. Now, that said, there's an important relationship that needs to be maintained, okay? The government owes Aboriginal people an ongoing amount of money. Here in this Treaty 7 territory, they kept more than half of our treaty money. We were supposed to get $12. They kept $7 for the administration. So we paid for those Indian agents and everything that was administered to us. So there was no cost on the government's part for anything that they did for us. We paid for it. But the Indian relationship with is nation to nation, okay? Our old people were so smart. They were so smart. They wrote, as long as the grass grows, as long as the rivers flow. That translates in legal terms into perpetuity. So forever. So we have a forever relationship at a treaty to treaty, nation to nation level, that all of our descendants will be entitled to a place to live in whatever the terms and conditions are. But the Indian Act was shoved in there, right? Well, in the Indian Act, under Section 4, you can have that link. Section 4, you can go out of it and you can develop your own self-government. You can replace it with your own governance model. But what you do with that is you have a Constitution of Canada. It's a body of laws, right? And you have your reserve over here. What is a fact of law is you can't have a vacuum of laws, okay? So if you have the reserve here and they haven't enacted anything, then the Canadian laws flow in. If they draft a constitution and they put all their own laws in, then it pushes them out. Our people have to be taught how to do that, and they have the right to do it. They know they have nation-to-nation rights. They know that they have not lost their rights. They never sold them or gave them away. It's just a matter of being able to articulate them. We're getting to that stage now, and that is why it is critical that our youth get through university so that they can understand these mechanisms and so that they can start to develop these pieces. So the Indian Act is twofold, right? Well, first of all, our treaties are the most important pieces, okay? The treaties have no acknowledgement whatsoever of the Indian Act. It was just a administrative document that was developed for the Indian agents to administer to the reserves at that time. It's a colonial piece of legislation, and in it there is no mechanism for complaint because the Indians weren't allowed to complain against the Indian agent, right? He had absolute and total control. He did starve them. They could send them to jail. They could hold court for. They did all of that, and they were fully empowered to do that. Chief and counsel now has to apply by Canadian law, human rights, all that stuff flows into the reserved territories because we don't have any legal boundaries for administration. Can it happen? Yes, it can. If you go to Ottawa and you've got the consulates for 200 and some odd different consulates that are there, when you're walking down the street and you open up the gate into the Romanian consul, as soon as you step onto in that gate, you're in Romanian territory. And they have developed interfacing legislation. So there's no reason why all the reserves in Canada can't have their own laws that coexist with Canadian laws. They do it already with all the consulates. So it's not impossible, and it won't take anything to do it. I don't know if I answered your question. He's talking, but I'm not hearing. I'm not hearing.
I think you did answer my question. I think I misspoke a little bit and kind of took us down the wrong path. So I apologize. I was really looking to, you answered everything that I was looking to state. And what I was really asking was, how do we get past the act itself and then maintain all of the important elements that you highlighted is really what I was hoping that you'd state, and you did state that. I misspoke in terms of asking my question, and I apologize.
Oh, no, apologies. No. We established all the rights. We have the mechanism. They can either opt out in Section 4 of the Indian Act, or they can, what it takes, it's just like the United States when they broke away from the British. The way they broke away from it, they had to write a constitution that establishes a nation. A nation has to have a constitution. Each Indigenous organization has to develop their own constitution, which identifies, if you look at the Constitution of Canada, it says what the powers are, what the financial powers are, like all of the accountability stuff is all there. You put the framework in the Constitution. You have to have that framework, and there's nothing stopping any of us from doing that. We have the right to do it.
Appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you.
And we have Noreen.
Okay, which one is that one?
Hi.
Hi, Noreen.
How are you? Thank you very much. You're a very eloquent teacher, and I really appreciate all that you've shared with us again. And it was really special. And it just opens your mind to so much. One of the things, I guess, is, in my time with education, when I'm a student, and I'll be a lifelong learner, I'm taking classes now, and I'm also a teacher now. So, one of the things that really strikes me is that we're not really taught as Indigenous people how recent, we've become learners. It's a very short time frame. And, 1960, we became citizens. So, I mean, we've been having to catch up to mainstream society in their, institutions, post-secondary institutions. And I think that's really not, shared with our learners, with our post-secondary students, how recent that is and how difficult that is. Like when I learned that, and because I internalized this thing that I wasn't going to be successful, because the odds were stacked up. I could feel the odds. So, I think it's really important that we share that with our learners, how recent that is. And I'm wondering, like, what is the most eloquent way that you think we could, given the fact that there's so much, and how do we hone that into our students so that they know that, here's two world views, and here's our rich culture that, there's so much. And this is where this is where you're comfortable, but you're expected to learn this other world view, and you're expected to excel. I'm just wondering if you have an idea of how we can do that in a succinct and way that, empowers our Indigenous learners.
Okay, so, boy, that's a jam-packed question. Okay, to start with, stereotyping. Stereotyping, if a person feels that they're being judged through the lens of stereotyping, it will usually impact their behavior. And there's some very good videos online where you can actually look them up. And they did a couple studies, one at Harvard and whatnot. And what they did was they took a group of students of various, backgrounds, and they used terminology that would intimidate the colored students. And then they gave them this exam. Sure enough, it turned out that way. They did the same thing, same exam with another group but they didn't use that terminology, and they performed the same. So just the language that you use impacts that person, that makes them feel inferior. And that awareness with educators, with society in general, is absolutely critical in understanding how to stop systemic racism and how to stop the impact. Now, the other part of the question, walking in two worlds, we're probably the only people that can do that, okay? I say that because our people were holistic. And when I say that, they learned to work and understand the animal world, and they lived with them, the plant world, the water, the air. We've learned to coexist. So we're probably the only ones that will have to find that blending to coexist and not lose ourselves. We don't have to choose one or the other. There is a middle road. And I believe that we're probably the ones that are capable of that. We are behind because of this 1963 piece. Imagine, can you imagine? I mean, every now and then this crosses my mind and it just horrifies me. Can you imagine the government took all the Indian agents off the reserves because they realized that they were going to be liable now for the decisions that they were making, and they just left the reserves with the chief and council to administer. They had no education, no background education, and not only that, but if you look at any city or town, right, in Canada, they can operate their little stores and they can operate their little mental health or their clinics or whatever. On our reserve, we know for a fact that every single reserve is producing another government report. At least one a day is being produced. None of these cities or towns have to do that. So the interference in our ability to even manage or operate, the oppression is extremely severe still. Mm-hmm. But I say, you know what that's doing? It's backfiring again. It's giving us incredible skills at being able to maneuver through this government stuff. When we do take over, and we will, I believe that the projections that were made way back in the 70s and 80s were that there would be 3 governments in Canada. That would be provincial, federal, and Indigenous. And I see all the pieces starting to form. So I have absolutely no doubt that will actually happen. So very, very important stuff. I also believe that we need to stay in control of our voice. And within the educational system, that our voice, especially within these educational environments, that we stay in control in there. Is that helpful?
Yes, thank you so much, and thank you for ending that question, the answer to that question, on such a very hopeful note. I agree. Like, the strides we've made are amazing, and you're definitely proof of that. So thank you very much.
You're welcome.
And we got another question.
Okay.
Thank you so much for your presentation, Dr. Minigun.
You're very welcome.
Just to kind of add to the last question, it's similar. With organizations and some employers, it's very competitive, internal, to advance or to have that the skills that we bring from an Indigenous perspective to, like, it doesn't fall within the criteria of anything, that value that we add to the organization. So that internal competitiveness to climb all over each other to get to that next level within the organizations. I felt it throughout my career, and I'm 20 years into my HR career. So if I feel it, I can't imagine what the students will be going through, you know, in this part of their journey. So maybe if you could give some pointers, like even to me, I try. It's not in me to really climb on over each other to really advance my career. I'd like to advance my career, but you know, I'm really not as competitive maybe as some of my peers. But maybe just can you give some insight into, for the students and for professionals such as myself who encounter that that mindset to be so competitive?
Yes, that's a very good question. That's a very concerning question as well, because employers judge people by whether or not they're interested in ladder climbing. Are you going to attend all the barbecues? Are you going to be, you know, like going that extra mile to you know, make it to the next level and whatnot? And that is what I was talking about with these behaviorisms. With our Aboriginal way of life, the way that we showed our interest was by attending and being and listening, right? Our presence was what was evaluated by our elders as, and then they would make the assessment as to whether or not, you know, they would give you more or whether you were ready for more. That's really ingrained in who we are, in the way we behave. And that's very, very different than the dominant society, which is constantly jumping ahead and jumping ahead. So my sense is that the place that this is now starting to be recognized is within Indigenous organizations, where people are all equal, and it's everybody together that makes change within the organization. I think it's going to take some real phenomenal work by HR people. I think that they need some training in regards to not using the same tools of evaluation and assessment that they would use on the general society. I think that there's a difference, though. If you have a completely traditional person, and then you have kind of a middle of the road person, which is where the average Indigenous person is, the behaviorisms might be a little bit different. And the more traditional a person, the more they're going to not want to be competitive. The less competitive, the less value they see in that type of behavior. They would rather let somebody else, because of the sharing and whatnot, they'll let somebody else take something before they'll take anything. I know even with my studies, I would get told about these various things that I could apply for to get some money. And I would never apply for them because I thought I'd be taking money from somebody else. And I would just struggle along. I didn't know until I got to the graduate level that here you show off all these things that you've won or that you've achieved. So we just think about things very differently. And we end up being evaluated based on those things as well. I think until our communities start to grow, and until we have more interaction with HR people, until we can start to teach people more about the evaluations, or how we would prefer to create an evaluation. And we're invited to be a part of those assessment things, then we're going to fail, right? So in an ideal world, it would be marvelous if if a group was hiring a lot of Aboriginal people, if they were to get the elders in to ask them to evaluate their assessment pieces so that they could be more culturally supportive, rather than eliminating people for the wrong reasons. I think that would be the best that we could do at this point. I think that there's employers that are interested in having Indigenous people. Maybe it's checking off the boxes. Maybe it's the fact that Aboriginal people are more readily available rather than bringing immigrant populations in. You know, who knows what the underlying intent is. But the fact of the matter is, Aboriginal people need to be a part of society and be able to contribute and to be able to work and feel like they're a beneficial part. How they use their money will be different. They'll probably go home and give it all away to their family members. I know that's what I do. But I mean, that's how we, are motivated by success and stuff like that. And that will probably never change. I hope that helps.
Thank you.
There's a question. No one said, they did it anonymously. It says, what is your view on modern day treaties?
What is my view on modern day treaties? Okay, so my view on modern day treaties is that they're extremely innovative. Modern day treaties actually have pushed the envelope a lot. They're huge documents. I mean, Treaty 7 is like a little, apart from the land description, there's not much in it apart from bullets and twine and stuff, and $12 for each person. But the modern day treaties, they negotiate mutual decision-making bodies to take care of the fish and the waters and the animals and the land. There's tons of case law as a result of the government breaking them constantly. But for the most part, they're really pushing the barrier. Look at Nunavut, for goodness sakes. It even amended the Criminal Code of Canada. So we're having an impact. As well, what's really important is Aboriginal law is growing so fast and is such a gigantic body of law that today at the law school that I went to, they now offer common law, civil law, and an Indigenous law degree. So does University of Victoria, so does University of Saskatoon. So you can actually become an Indigenous lawyer for Indigenous law. And I honestly believe that if we keep moving forward like we have been, that the treaties will ensure that our laws actually exist. I was hoping that I'd be able to teach a Blackfoot Indigenous law course. And I believe there could easily be a Cree law course. There could be all the major Indigenous bodies in Canada could actually have and establish their own law system. And the modern treaties are the places where those would be validated. And it's not just modern treaties. I mean, all of the treaties are valid. Just because our treaty was written a long time ago, it's a living document. Those clauses can be opened up and renegotiated. So it's a standing document, and it can be opened up and modernized as well. So there's no reason for just looking at modern treaties as some exemplary piece of legislation. Okay. Okay. Are there any more questions?
I think we're good, right? Awesome. I will come on. I'm glad you got some water.
Yeah, I know.
So I wanted to give you a gift and maybe I know Rob's here, but if you can open it, we would like you to look at it
Okay.
and wear it.
All right, thank you.
Thank you so much for all of the wisdom that you share each year. I'm very, very thankful that my son is online listening today and different people from my family. And every time you speak, there's new things that I'm learning. And I really like all of the research that you do and you continue to do. And I like when I could heard someone say lifelong learning.
Yes.
Definitely you are one of those people
yeah.
that are always, but open it and have a look.
Okay,
I know everyone wants to see it.
Open this.
You put it down. Yeah.
Okay. Oh, look at this. Oh my gosh, this is beautiful. Oh,
And all of
isn't that wonderful?
That was made by Joanne Redoldman.
Oh, isn't that wonderful? Oh.
Just imagine everything you have.
Jazz.
And I have one more too. Another gift here too.
Okay. Oh, this is nice. Oh, a nice blanket. Oh, my cats will love this. They go, with they make bread on it. Yes. Oh, isn't that nice?
And then that matches.
Isn't that pretty?
Yes.
Oh, a very nice cup. Right, that's beautiful.
And then I got you this one.
Oh,
This gift you.
okay. Oh, isn't that neat?
Yes.
Oh,
yes.
isn't that fabulous? Great. Okay.
Yes, thank you very much.
Thank you.
And so what we're going to do now is we're going to go into the networking. And Rob has a comment. I will get him to take you off into the networking.
Okay.
Thank you, Linda. Take your time. Take your time. Actually, stay up here. I know Linda is so generous and humble, and she's already said she's going to give all the gifts away to her cats. I'm sure there's other people. That behavior of giving, and she keeps it going. But just before Linda's off, definitely I'm so grateful. Linda was my first First Nations instructor that I had my whole life in my undergrad degree, and it was like a big paradigm shift. It was definitely changing and actually helped me build a trusting relationship with other instructors, non-Indigenous. So that it was a really big step for me to do better academically. I think my GPA went up after having an instructor that I trusted for the first time. And then you've always come back to help. So thank you very much.
Yes, you're very welcome.
And so before we switch over, I just wanted to go back to Mark's question about, I don't know if that's his in the Q&A, but his question was really about if we're hiring a Treaty 7 student or an Indigenous student, what can we do to maybe bring some of the culture, the Indigenous culture or Treaty 7 culture into our workplace? And that's a genuine thought to try to pursue. And I think Linda did answer it, and maybe there's a way to do it, but we've also tried to do that. We're not, we haven't perfected it either. We tried it this year with our student committee, but the one thing that I would point out for employers that want to try to do the same, if you're going to ask students to do some of that stuff, make sure you support them. So if we're going to say, if you are ready, okay, you've hired your student, and you said, can maybe you lead a meeting, or can you do this, or can you do that? Ask their permission, and if they're willing to do it, you've then got to support them, and that may mean you've got to put a little budget in place for them to lead that session or lead that meeting or whatever it is you're trying to get them to maybe do if they're comfortable to do it. And students are young as well. They may not have the transfer rights to lead and do certain things, so they would need to bring an elder with them. And that's something, if you're going to try that genuinely, how you would support them is maybe giving them the gifts and the honorarium to bring an elder in that has the rights to help out. We kind of explained why we use Francis and how he helps us and has helped our students at some of our meetings. So I hope that helps. If people were curious, that would just a recommendation and something that we have tried. And we're going to bring Francis to the stage because he's got a comment and he can probably speak to this way better than the rest of us.
Yeah.
So I think Francis just needs to turn on his camera. There we go.
Hello. The reason why I'm wearing my sunglasses, I had eye surgery. I got on earlier because I was able, but after a while, the strain on the monitor had to put on these sunglasses. But I just had a couple of things I wanted to follow up of Linda's presentation. A group of our elders, a group of our leaders, chief and council, went to Ottawa. This was quite a few years ago, and they went with one of our grandfathers. And of course, chief and council were really excited. They're going to go see the original Treaty 7 document. And when they went there, they're showing that elder this really fascinated with this. And the elder said, he said, don't place too much importance on that paper. You see, they couldn't read or write. But what they emphasize is, a few years ago, this has two stories, but I won't go too long in depth, and this can take a long time. But when there was, instead of swearing on the Bible, they wanted to swear on the pipe. Two of us, one of them has passed away. They asked us, "What do you think?" And then the other grandfather told me, "What do you think?" And I said, "I don't think so. It's too powerful." And he went back, and I was there when they were going to do it. He said, "We talked about it, that you can't lie on that pipe. It's so powerful. And if you guys want to swear on that Atawanishi, to make a promise with that pipe, most of you guys are not going to, you're all going to break what you're saying. So what we're going to do is we'll pray for you that you'll do a good job." So they all did that. And when we went to Japan, we're going to do our export agreement. We did all the work, us, the people that were involved. And at the end, when we went to Japan, the top guy and that time, well, this is still the Chief Roy Fox and Ono-san, they sat from one another and they both talked about what they wanted to do. And it involved several millions of dollars. We tried to figure it out one time. I think it's about $10 million worth of money they're going to give us, the Japanese, Sumitomo. There was no argument. There was no agreement on as thick as a phone book. Believe it or not, they both shook hands. That's how they agreed. In our way, our words are very strong. We have to honor them. And there's no such thing as all this paperwork. It's what they promised. But the old people said that the treaty is very powerful. It's more significant because it was done with the pipe. It can never be broken. The only people that will break it is ourselves. He said, so be careful, they told me. And I always mention that to leadership. That's what the old people are. But also, in addition to your comment about our way of thinking. We had a major position we're going to on our reserve that we're going to recruit. We had non-native and also from reserve members and non-reserve members that applied. And we had an extensive evaluation with them. And each one, they were given as much as finger dexterity, how they do keyboarding and all that stuff. They did the tests. And then had those questions. When I got the results back, they said, you know, these questions, there was a part there, we just noticed that the non-natives scored really high, and the ones on the reserve, or the ones that they scored really low. He said, we're going to take those questions off because their values were different, how they answered those questions. And so we took them off so it'll be a more at even point here, and we never used that as a score they had. We listened to them, what they had to say, and then we made our final decision. I just wanted to add on to that. You did good, Linda. All right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I think that's all.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you again.
Here, Robert, you want to give me this? You didn't give it to me.
Oh.
Thank you, Linda.
You're welcome. Thank you. Okay, great.
And then
Okay, marvelous.
we also have a gift for our MC Loa Bibi, and she's been emceeing the event for 3 years now. So we're happy to give her a gift again. She's always helpful on social media. You'll see everything later. I'm sure of it. Thank you, Loa.
Thank you. I've been doing it. Thank you. The big crowd here. I've been doing a lot of ads on my social media on Snapchat and Facebook.
Oh.
So have a look there in my stories if you want to see, and they're public. But this is right here's the camera. Yeah, there's a camera.
The camera probably doesn't do it justice, but these things are incredible.
Yeah,
up
they're
close
beautiful.
when you see them in person.
You.
So
Thank you very much for the gifts. Thank you. And so we are going to do the networking, and then Rob and I are going to come back for closing comments. And I again want to say it's just been an amazing day. And please look at my Snapchat stories or Instagram and story. I have stories all over. So definitely for the behind the scenes, and I will post a few photos on my Facebook as well. So we'll see you in
20 minutes?
20 minutes.
20 minutes
20
should be
minutes
good.
for networking.
But if it looks like conversations are going well, we can give it another 5 minutes. You'll have a 5-minute notification before we come back for the final words. And feel free to stop in. Linda has a table. There might be a lineup. But yeah, feel free to chat with Linda or Francis. Francis is still here, and Loa will have her own table as well. So we will see you guys shortly.